Lucy Letby now. She's going to be quizzed over more baby murders that presumably she's allegedly in the frame for, which brings into sharp focus what many people have been saying, many commentators, leading thought thinkers have been saying over the past few months that perhaps, just perhaps, Lucy Letby is the victim of a monstrous miscarriage of justice. Well, a warm welcome to the show to Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens. Welcome, Peter.
Pleasure to be with you, Cohen.
Thank you for joining me. Well, first of all, never mind the story today. Outline your reasons for at least doubting the veracity of the verdicts against him.
I think in the case of many of us who doubt the safety of the verdict, and that's as far as any of us can really go, it came with a particular moment during the trial or afterwards when we thought there was something slightly wrong or off about the way the trial was conducted. For me, there was a very brutal interrogation of Miss Letby while she was in the witness box by the prosecution barrister, which seemed to me to be excessive. And there was also the curious event when she was arrested for the first of 3 times. She was arrested 3 times before she was finally charged, when her garden was dug up in conditions of total publicity, an event I've still never seen her explain. There's no suggestion that she kept anything in her garden. It just gave people the impression that one was doing a sort of Rose West figure. I felt that by the time the trial opened, it was the whole idea that there should be presumption of innocence. It seemed to have been forgotten in practice, though in theory it still existed. So there was that, and then I came after the verdicts to look into the actual charges and the way they were pursued. I'm still trying to obtain, as several people are, the transcript of the trial, and I haven't yet been successful. It's not as easy as you might think. But despite not having that, I have the very strong impression, and in fact I find when I contest this with the more intelligent of the pro-prosecution people, that there really wasn't any solid objective evidence against her, that it's all supposition, it's all circumstantial, and to send someone to prison for the rest of their lives on the basis of that seems to me to be extremely risky. And that's really it. I mean, there's much, much more. It was an immensely long trial. And as I say, when I get hold of the transcript, I'll be able to discuss in more detail the problems with it. There's also, it seems to be a growing feeling among those of us who are worried about the verdict that the jury wasn't, for various reasons, told a number of things which would have been important. And then there's the other extraordinary thing, and I'm not seeking to blame anybody for this because there's no point anyway, but the defense had actually on standby a very expert witness for their side, and he was never called. He's since given interviews, a very interesting interview in a recent book called Lucy Letby Unmasked by Jonathan Coffey and Judith Moritz, in which it's quite clear that he believes very strongly that she didn't have a fair trial. And he was there pretty much during the whole trial. Not every second, but for most of it he was present. And I think his view has to be taken very seriously. So that's really why. I think that there's a feeling here that this thing wants to be reopened, that more evidence should be heard, that some of the assertions made by the prosecution should be questioned, perhaps by more expert people than they were questioned by before. And let's see what happens. If she is indeed guilty, then that would emerge, it would seem to me, in such a reopening. And so the people who believe that she's guilty have nothing to fear at all from the reopening of the case if they're right. And if they're wrong, then surely they don't want her to be locked up for the rest of her life for nothing any more than I do.
One other extraordinary aspect of this case was that she spent 23 months in jail before even coming to trial, which is a very long time for incarceration on remand. But is there a suggestion also, Peter, that her conviction for these awful deaths was a convenient way to cover up for deficiencies at this hospital?
Again, I'm really not trying to attribute blame to anybody. Miscarriages of justice happen for many reasons. They happen because the crime which is being discussed is so horrifying that people become, in some cases, too angry to consider carefully what it is that they're hearing. Mm-hmm. They happen because a groupthink develops. and therefore no one really listens to the other side. But I'm not really interested in recrimination and trying to find out who's to blame for this. I think that would slow the process down in any case. My whole purpose is to try and get the thing reopened so that it's properly examined in the way which I do not think it was in the first trial, or indeed the second retrial on a charge of attempted murder on which she was also convicted. I think that we just need to have the thing examined again more coolly, more objectively, more carefully, and we also, I think, need to have a different atmosphere surrounding the trial from the one that surrounded that one. And I think we need, very definitely, we need to have expert witnesses testifying on her behalf. But I really am not interested in attributing blame or trying to find reasons why it happened. Things go wrong in the justice system because the stakes are often very high and people get very passionate. And I don't blame them for that. I'm not attacking the jury. I think the jury, as is often the case in miscarriages of justice, were not as well informed as they should have been. And that didn't help. And I think that they grasped at some things they were shown because an awful lot of the evidence that they were being given was incredibly technical and hard to follow. So there are many, many reasons why this happened, but I'm not trying to find or attribute blame for it. I just want, if this young woman sitting in a prison till she dies is there on the basis of miscarriage of justice and ought not to be there, then all civilized people, whatever they think, should be working very, very hard to make sure that she is freed. If she was justly convicted, then we need to have much better evidence for her wrongdoing than was presented at either of the trials at which she was convicted.
Just to put everyone in the picture, she's 34, former neonatal nurse, serving a rare whole life sentence for murdering 7 babies and trying to kill 7 more at the Countess of Chester Hospital over a 13-month killing spree. I think in the frame of this conversation, the alleged killing spree. Why was it, Peter, do you think, that the expert witnesses, given that in a case like this, when there is no real definitive physical evidence, expert testimony is vital, it's crucial. Why was some of her expert testimony not allowed into court?
We don't know, and until the defence explain it, we never will know, and I suspect they never will. My own suspicion is that I don't think the defence really knew what they were up against. They were handling it in a very... there's nothing wrong with the competence of the chief defence barrister, and he's a distinguished man. But he was up against something quite unusual. I wrote an article for Spectator magazine some months ago now, in which I explained that there was a sort of street theatre going on around this case for many, many months beforehand. And it took place in very, very odd conditions. Not merely the 23-month wait between final arrest and the actual beginnings of the trial, but also a whole atmosphere of her being surrounded by a fairly strong view that she was de facto being presumed guilty. As I say, this business of the digging up a garden, and that was. There were also very other odd things about the case which people should consider. Now, I can completely understand why the parents of the babies involved, the ones who were allegedly murdered or harmed, sought and achieved anonymity. Nobody wants to intrude into their private grief. But what is quite extraordinary in this trial is I believe 9 prosecution witnesses were given anonymity. Which is so extraordinary that it makes the jaw drop open. And they were given anonymity for reasons I can't quite fathom. And I don't think outside a treason trial or a major spy trial this has ever been done before. And it really does give the impression of a very highly dramatic occasion rather than a cool and forensic examination of the case against her that worries me.
And I think there were briefings by the Crown Prosecution Service to their various reporters, which you've written could well have kind of flavoured their approach to the case as they reported on it.
Well, look at it like this. If you, you probably in your early career covered trials, most of us did, and you went along and you did as good a shorthand note as you could, and you stayed as alert as you could, and when you transcribed what you'd noted, you tried to be as fair and as accurate and indeed as quick and contemporaneous as possible, because those were the rules under which we reported trials. It had to be fair, accurate, and contemporaneous, and if you did that, you were privileged against defamation laws or anything you did. And that's all you needed to do. I can't see why anyone would need to be briefed about a criminal trial in which enormous amounts of information are given to you in conditions of extraordinary privilege, things that you couldn't normally say about people because they're said in court. And there you have it. I couldn't see what a briefing was for in that case, and I'm still puzzled. What I do know is this, and I'll be a bit general here. I spent an awful lot of time as a journalist, as a specialist journalist, as a defence correspondent for a short while and a diplomatic correspondent, as an industrial and labour correspondent, and working in the parliamentary lobby. And it always seemed to me, looking back on it especially, that those organisations, from the government to the trade unions, that wanted to brief us and embrace us and make friends with us, wanted to exact a price for that. That in return for the familiarity and the accessibility they were offering, you were, how shall I put it, obligated to them.
Yeah.
And I think that is always the case in journalism, that if the moment you start accepting these things. Now, I'm not criticising the journalists involved in this case. Had I been offered a briefing, had I been them, I would have gone. I think that's perfectly reasonable, and actually I don't criticise any of the reporters in this. Though I disagree with several of them about their conclusions about what happened, but they were doing their job, and that was okay. What I do feel is that there's something. I was shocked. It's actually mentioned in a short paragraph in Judith Moritz and Jonathan Coffey's book. I was shocked when I read this, and I asked a number of other journalists I know who've been around for a long time, and they too were shocked at the idea there'd been a briefing before a trial. The other thing is, the briefing was given by 3 senior officers of Cheshire Police and 2 very senior prosecutors of the Crown Prosecution Service in the northwest of England. Now, if it was a briefing, why didn't they invite the defence?
Yes, that's interesting.
So the question I've asked for a transcript or a recording of the briefing, and I was told that there's none available. Again, I would have thought you would record such a thing if you did it.
Interesting. One last quick question, Peter. What do you make of the fact, all over the front page of the Mail today, that she's being quizzed over more baby murders? Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's a powerful scoop by Liz Hull, the Daily Mail's Northern reporter, and it's a very interesting story. I have to ask, and I still think it's an extremely interesting question, what is the purpose of further prosecutions of Lucy Letby? She's already in prison until she dies. What are they going to do? Make her stay in prison after she's dead?
Yes, she's got.
I don't. What is and you have to ask what will this do? And I'll tell you, I don't know why they're doing it, because they haven't told me and they haven't said. But one would ask, is it possible that somebody might have thought that putting her on trial again would mean that for the many months of that trial, indeed as soon as charges had been preferred, if I remember the law correctly, none of us would be able to say anything about it. Not just about that case, but anything we said about the case at all would break the sub judice rule and make us subject to contempt of court proceedings and quite serious penalties. So it would silence what has become actually a very active debate, quite dangerous, it seems to me, to the prosecution. So whether that's the intended effect or not, I have no idea. But it would seem to me to be undoubtedly an effect which will happen when and if these charges emerge and are prosecuted. So one has to wonder whether anyone has that in mind, but doubtless they wouldn't do anything so, how shall I put it, cynical.
Peter, listen, really good to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time.